If you talk to yourself when alone, mindful patterns. Have you ever noticed it happens most when no one is listening? You're washing dishes, folding laundry, driving home, or walking from one room to another, and suddenly you hear your own voice. Sometimes it's barely a whisper. Sometimes it's a full sentence, as if you're narrating your life to an invisible audience. You might be explaining what you're about to do, replaying something that happened earlier, or practicing what you wish you had said. And then, almost immediately, a second feeling shows up, a small flicker of embarrassment, the kind that makes you look over your shoulder, even when you're alone. Because somewhere along the way, many of us absorb the idea that talking to yourself is weird or a sign that something is wrong. But psychology doesn't automatically read it that way. In many cases, self-talk isn't a glitch, it's a feature. It's the mind doing what minds are built to do: organize experience, regulate emotion, and make meaning out of a world that can be overwhelming. So in this video, I want to slow down with you and look at self-talk the way a scientist might, but also the way a caring person would. Not as a label, not as a diagnosis, more like a pattern you can finally understand. When psychologists talk about talking to yourself, they often call it inner speech. Inner speech can be silent, like thoughts that feel verbal. Or it can become audible, especially when you're alone and the brain doesn't need to filter it as tightly. This is closely connected to metacognition, which is your ability to notice your own mental state. It's the part of you that can step back and say, "I'm stressed," or "I'm spiraling," or "I need a minute." In the brain, this involves a kind of teamwork. Regions in the prefrontal cortex help with planning, perspective, and inhibition, while deeper emotional systems, often described as limbic circuits, react quickly to threat, rejection, or uncertainty. If you've ever felt your heart rate rise before your mind catches up, you've felt that faster system at work. Self-talk can act like a bridge between those systems. It can translate raw emotion into language, and language into choice. A helpful image is to think of your mind like a crowded room. Emotions are speaking all at once. Memories are pulling you backward. Worries are projecting the future. Self-talk is the part of you that stands up and says, "Wait, let's take turns. What is actually happening right now?" It doesn't always sound calm, but its purpose is often regulation, not performance. Now let's look at a few common ways self-talk shows up and what it might be doing for you underneath the surface. The first pattern is narration. This is when you talk yourself through tasks. Okay, keys, phone, wallet. First, I'll answer this email, then I'll make coffee. Don't forget to call them back. It can feel almost comically practical, like you're your own assistant. From a cognitive perspective, this kind of self-talk can reduce the load on working memory. Your brain can only hold so many pieces of information at once, especially when you're tired, stressed, or overstimulated. Putting thoughts into words, out loud or in your head, creates structure. It turns a cloud of mental tabs into a sequence. It also recruits the parts of the brain that are better at planning and sequencing, which can make you feel more anchored. For some people, this habit becomes stronger if they grew up having to be very self-reliant. If you were the one who had to remember things, manage responsibilities early, or keep yourself emotionally organized because adults around you were inconsistent, your nervous system may have learned, "I have to hold it all together." Narration becomes a quiet form of self-support, not dramatic, just steady. And when you reframe it, it stops looking like odd behavior and starts looking like competence. This isn't you being too much in your head. This is you building scaffolding so you can function in a complex world. It's your mind creating order when life doesn't offer much of it. The second pattern is replay and rehearsal. This is when you find yourself reliving a conversation, arguing with someone in your kitchen, or practicing what you might say tomorrow. Sometimes you win the argument in your head. Sometimes you freeze all over again. Sometimes you rewrite the whole scene, hoping it will finally feel settled. This is often the social brain doing its job, maybe a little too intensely. Humans are wired for belonging, and the brain treats social threat as real threat. When something feels ambiguous, an awkward pause, a tone you can't read, a message left on seen, the mind tries to close the loop. It searches for meaning. Self-talk becomes a way to test interpretations. Maybe I sounded rude. Maybe they're upset. Maybe I should explain myself. In cognitive terms, you're trying to reduce uncertainty and regain a sense of control. Where does this come from? Sometimes it's simply a sensitive nervous system paired with a socially demanding life. But for many people, rehearsal becomes chronic when early relationships were emotionally unpredictable. If you grew up around criticism, sudden mood shifts, or love that felt conditional, you may have learned to scan for cues and prepare for impact. Your brain became a strategist. Rehearsing isn't vanity. It's a protective skill that formed when being unprepared had consequences. Reframed gently, this pattern can mean you care about connection, and you've learned to take it seriously. The goal isn't to shame yourself for replaying. It's to notice when rehearsal stops being preparation and starts being self-punishment. Self-talk can be used to practice self-advocacy, not just self-defense. The third pattern is self-soothing talk. This one is quieter and often more private. It can sound like, "It's okay, breathe. Just get through the next 5 minutes." Or even, I know, that hurt." Some people only notice they do it when they're anxious, overstimulated, or on the edge of tears. This is emotion regulation in language form. When the nervous system is activated, the body looks for signals of safety. Warm, steady self-talk can function like a substitute for an external soothing presence. It can help slow the stress response and bring the body back into a window where thinking becomes possible again. In everyday terms, it helps you return to yourself. Its origins can be varied. Some people learned it through therapy, mindfulness, or healthy parenting. Others learned it because nobody else did it for them. If comfort wasn't reliably available, you may have built an internal version. That doesn't mean your childhood was bad in a dramatic way. It might simply mean you learned to be your own steady hand. The reframe here is deeply human. Talking to yourself kindly is not pathetic. It is the mind's attempt to provide care. It's what an attuned caregiver would have offered, a voice that says, "I see you and you can survive this moment." When you talk to yourself like that, you're not being dramatic. You're meeting a biological need for regulation. The fourth pattern is the harsh inner commentator, the self-talk that sounds like a judge. "Why are you like this? You messed it up again. Everyone else can handle it." Sometimes it's spoken aloud in frustration, like you're scolding a person who lives in your head. Psychologically, this can be understood as internalized voice. The mind absorbs the emotional tone of important relationships and recreates it inside, especially under stress. When the brain senses threat, failure, rejection, uncertainty, it may default to control strategies. Harsh self-talk can be a misguided attempt to force improvement through pressure. It can also be a way to preempt criticism. If I criticize myself first, it will hurt less when someone else does. This pattern often has roots in environments where mistakes weren't safe. Maybe affection felt conditional on achievement. Maybe you were praised for being easy and punished for having needs. Maybe emotions were met with dismissal. In those settings, the mind learns to police itself. Not because you're broken, but because self-monitoring once kept you connected, or at least protected. The reframe isn't to romanticize it. Harsh self-talk can be painful, but understanding its function changes how you relate to it. That voice is rarely the truth. More often, it's a nervous system strategy that got stuck. The goal isn't to delete it overnight. It's to develop a second voice, steadier, more accurate, more adult, that can say, "I hear the fear underneath that, and we can do better than punishment." When you step back and look at these patterns together, something starts to become clear. Self-talk is not one behavior with one meaning. It's a whole system of mental self-regulation. Narration organizes cognition. Rehearsal tries to repair social uncertainty. Soothing language calms the body. The inner critic attempts control when safety feels fragile. Different voices emerge depending on what your nervous system believes you need in that moment. And that's why you might talk to yourself more when you're alone. Solitude removes external structure. There's less feedback, fewer interruptions, fewer cues of safety. Your mind becomes both the stage and the audience. Self-talk fills the gap. It becomes a way of holding yourself together when no one else is there to reflect you back. In a sense, your self-talk is a record of your adaptation. It shows what your mind learned to do to survive, to connect, to perform, to cope. And even when it's messy, especially when it's messy, it's still meaningful. Not as a diagnosis, as information. So if you talk to yourself when you're alone, here's the gentlest truth I can offer. You are not malfunctioning. You are responding. You are processing. You are trying to create clarity, safety, and continuity inside your own experience. If you want a simple, mindful way to work with this, try listening to the tone before you fix the content. Ask quietly, is the voice inside me trying to organize, protect, soothe, or punish? You don't need to force it to be positive. You just need to know what job it's doing. Awareness is often the first form of relief. And if your self-talk is kind, let it be kind without embarrassment. That tenderness is not weakness. It's emotional intelligence with a pulse. If your self-talk is harsh, treat that harshness as a sign of strain, not a character flaw. You can learn a different internal language over time, one that is honest without being cruel. Because the people who seem fine all the time aren't always the strongest. Sometimes the strongest are the ones who quietly learn how to be with themselves. The ones who can sit in a room alone, hear their own mind speaking, and choose to answer with something steady. If you want to keep exploring your inner patterns through real psychology without being judged and without being simplified, stay with this channel. We'll keep naming what you've felt for years, and we'll keep doing it with respect. If this video put words to something you felt for a long time but never knew how to explain, that's not a coincidence. How often do you catch yourself talking to yourself like this, out loud or just in your head? Just comment often or rarely, or share one sentence you've said to yourself this week. And if this gave you even a little clarity, stay close to the Quiet Mind Lab. This is what we do here. Gentle psychology, without the noise, without the judgment.